Hey guys, Brian Schoaf here for BombasticEntertainment.com, and today I'm super excited because I've finally put the finishing touches on a long-standing nerd project, building a movie-quality Proton Pack replica. Now, I'm no stranger to prop building. I've done a lot of props and makeup effects, not only for my own, but for other people's films over the years, but being a lifelong fan of movies, certain prop builds like making a Proton Pack to add to my own collection has always been kind of a bucket list build project for me. I did quite a bit of research, and as much as I'd have liked to have scratch built this entire thing, Anovos just happened to announce they were putting out a kit for $600, and it just made more sense financially to throw my hat in that ring. And even though it was a kit, I'd still get to have all the fun of putting it together myself. Well, enough has been said on the internet about Anovos consumer practices, and I'm not going to get into that here. What I will say is that it took 2 years for my pack kit to finally arrive, and surprisingly, everything was intact. I had heard some horror stories about people getting their kits and parts being broken, and luckily, none of mine were. I was missing one aluminum side knob, and I reached out to them about sending a replacement, and to their credit, they are going to make it right, but as of posting this video almost 4 months later, I'm still waiting for my replacement knob, so make of that what you will. Now, full disclaimer, I'm not taking credit for everything here. While I was waiting for my kit to ship, I discovered the forums on gbfans.com, and if I had found that forum first, I might not have gone the Anovos route, but it was pretty inspiring to see what everyone had done with their pack builds, and to be able to cherry pick ideas for what I wanted to do with my pack. So I owe a lot to those forums, and I encourage everyone to check them out if you're interested in making a pack of your own. While this isn't meant to be an in-depth tutorial, I'm going to break down this video into a few sections and provide timestamps in the video description. I did upgrade certain pieces, and while Anovos provides a complete kit to build, I'll show the originals included with the kit and try and explain why I upgraded them as we go along. First, let's start with unboxing. Chances are, if you're watching this video, you're not interested in following the included instructions, and I can't blame you. While they are a decent starting point, they basically just show you an exploded view of the pack and thrower and call it a step. I mean right here, just put the whole pack together. One step, it's that easy. Get real. So you can see it's a decent reference for some things, but woefully inadequate for others. The biggest thing I found them helpful for was inventorying the parts to make sure everything was all here, and then tried dry fitting things together to see if I could figure out what they meant. When that failed, I used a hybrid approach of looking at reference photos of screen-used props and referring to what people did with their own pack builds over on the GB Fans forums. And that got me through some of the trickier parts of this build. Now before you start, you're going to want to try and dry fit all your pieces together, and I recommend trying to get all your drilling and tooling done before you start to paint to minimize any complications later. With everything sorted, I laid out what I knew was going to need painting and prepped those pieces, and I didn't really need to do a whole lot in that regard. Mostly everything gets a couple coats of black paint, and for that, Rust-Oleum makes a nice satin black. I think it's called Canyon Black. Since this was a paint and primer in one, I didn't bother sanding or priming the pieces, and I have to say they took paint extremely well. So just make sure the pieces are clean and dry so they don't trap dirt or moisture and go all Silent Hill on you, and that's really all there was to that. I didn't do much in the way of weathering. After thinking about it for a few days, I decided I would do weathering once I had some actual dings to cover up, and start with just kind of a fresh from the factory look. But one thing I did weather are the hand grips on the neutrino wand, and for that, after painting the wand black, I masked off the thrower handles and gave them a coat of this Rust-Oleum cinnamon, and after that fully cured, I buffed that off with extra fine grit sandpaper and some Scotch-Brite. And that created a nice, well-worn resin-looking effect that the screen-used props had. Then on the ion arm assembly, after it was painted black, since it was made out of aluminum, I just roughed it up with some sandpaper. Now I did have to revisit painting as assembly went on due to some occasional casualties of the build process or some other unforeseen problems. More on those as we go along. While Anovos provides a complete kit, there were certain things I just thought could have been better, and since I'm only doing this once, I thought, here are the things that would take this pack to that next level. So here's a list of things that I upgraded from the stock kit. Hat lights and clip lights, I used real clippered valves and brass fittings, elbow fittings, a light and sound kit from gbfans.com, an aluminum trigger ring, a Dale PH25 resistor, the booster ladder, the labels, and a bar graph bezel kit from GBFans user Spongeface. Some of the body tubes I replaced with 1/8 inch tubing that I had left over from a previous Ghost Trap build. As I mentioned already, even though I upgraded certain pieces, I'll show the originals included with the kit and try and explain why I upgraded those as we go along. The first thing I wanted to do was get out of the way any drilling or tooling I needed to do. Now, before you start cutting on these things, I cannot emphasize strongly enough you should be wearing a particle mask. The pack is made out of resin and fiberglass is just about the worst thing you can possibly breathe, so be smart and use a mask. Now, the cyclotron holes were pre-cut, so that was nice, but I did have to drill a hole where the ribbon cable plugs into the body, and that was easy enough with a large drill bit. By far, the hardest, most involved thing in the entire pack build was cutting out and fitting the power cell window. For that, I started by drilling a series of small holes with a regular drill bit just to kind of cut the bulk out, then came in with a cutting burr on a rotary tool to knock out the rest, then came in with a square file and cleaned up the edges. You'd think you were done, but that's just the beginning. I tried to dry fit the power cell window in place, but the interior of the pack shell here, it just isn't flat. So I had to grind it out quite a bit using my rotary tool and a cutting burr. Just take your time and try and get it as flat as possible. It's not going to be pleasant, and it's going to make a mess. So hopefully you're doing this in a garage and not in your kitchen. I was getting a little worried with so much grinding that I'd go straight through the power cell, so once I got a fit that was reasonably close, I blew the pack clean with an air hose and made sure the electronics would fit in. And once I was certain there was enough room for everything, then I glued in the acrylic piece and used some Loctite epoxy putty to form a seal around the window to prevent any light leaks. For the cyclotron, I glued those lenses in place, let them dry, and hot glued some flashlight reflectors over the holes. The bumper had its holes pre-drilled, but on my copy, the mating holes on the pack had to have those drilled out. So I put the screws into the bumper and then made sure that those lined up with the holes on the pack body. Once I was sure they lined up, I drilled the holes on the pack itself, cleaned those out, then fit the bumper on and screwed the whole thing in place. The long screw that holds the bellows on was just a little bit off center, so I widened the hole on the bumper and then it just dropped right into place. And then you can run the nuts on and get everything all buttoned up and secure. Installing the ribbon cable was pretty simple. Basically, I found the end and then lined the plates up and used a power drill to cut holes in the ribbon for attaching the screws. Getting it twisted into shape is kind of an aesthetic thing. I can't really provide any insight here. Just look at some photos and try and roll it how you think looks right. Probably the hardest thing was getting it bolted down to the booster ladder while keeping the roll tight. A couple of zip ties would have helped greatly with that. Then on the inside, once I had the bolts run through, I backed them with some super glue for added durability. And once the ribbon cable itself was run through its hole, I secured it in place with a zip tie to prevent slipping and buried that whole thing with a wad of hot glue. For the ion arm, most everything glues into place. I very carefully drilled out the holes on the top and bottom of the resistor using a drill press. And here we have the first casualty of the build. With the drill bits, I went a little too big too fast and wound up cracking the large resistor, but all is not lost. I put it back together and backed it with some epoxy putty, let that set up, hit it with a coat of spray paint, and it's not ideal, but it could have been a lot worse. Now, one of the pieces I decided to upgrade was the PH25 resistor on the side of the ion arm assembly. They included a nice one, but I just knew having a real one would look better than any metallic paint job that I could do, so I drilled the hole out for it, clipped and filed the terminals flat, and then inserted it into place. And here I goofed up. I left the mounting hardware on. It shouldn't be there. On the other hand, something did need to be there because the shape of the resistor is just a little too small to cover the shape of the pre-keyed hole. And you can see a little shelf on the replica they included, but by the time I noticed it, it was already epoxied in place. It's not kosher with the movie, but I can live with it. Another thing I upgraded was I replaced most of the brass fittings with real clippered fittings. They come with some nice replicas, but you can see the barb on theirs is smooth. It's probably for ease of slipping the tube over, but I decided to go the extra mile for authenticity's sake. To get your tubes to slip on, I recommend dipping the ends in some hot water, and then when it's nice and pliable, you can just slip it down over the barb. You'll do the same hot water trick with the blue tube over this post here. I cut some of the mother tubing to size, making an angle at the bottom so it'll sit flush once it's in place, then slid it down over the top of the blue tube and put a bead of E6000 superglue to hold it in place. For the fittings and the pre-drilled holes, it was kind of all over the place. Some fit perfectly right in, some were a little loose, so I had to superglue those in place. And others I had to clean up and recut with a thread and a tap. I do recommend getting a set of taps. Not only do they come in handy here, in general, they're just a very useful tool to have around. For the end filter, I lined that with a sink strainer, hot glued that into place, and backed it with some white foam I had lying around. I think some electronic that I had bought had come wrapped in it. It has a nice diffused effect, and when the vent light goes off, the sink strainer adds a nice texture. The vent light itself is just secured in place with some electrical tape and kind of hovers over the middle of the hole. You'd think it wouldn't be that bright, but when it kicks, and I think the white foam helps bounce the light around inside. The neutrino wand is a whole world unto itself. I had a lot of respect for people who have built these things before, but having put one together myself, you can really see that there's certain areas where form succeeds over function, and it kind of complicates the build process. Like the pack shell, I tried to get any drilling out of the way first, like for the clippered valve, and also to make sure the holes for the lights and switches would work. Now the replicas for the clippered valves that the kit came with, they're pretty nice, and they've got some nice aluminum knobs, but they're meant to be glued into place, so they're not functional like they are on the real clippered valves. And the labels, for copyright reasons, say Anovos on them. You could make these work with a little bit of effort, and you're definitely going to need some new labels, but I just decided to replace them for the sake of authenticity. After the initial painting and weathering was done, I decided the thing to do was to build this with a mind for how I was going to install the electronics, so as not to overcomplicate their installation later. Anovos claims on the product page you can install electronics at a later date, and all I have to say is if you build this thing and then try and install electronics, it's your funeral. First, I marked all the wires and then disconnected them from the electronics board so I could work with them individually. It just gets to be too much of a spaghetti mess otherwise. One thing that absolutely had to be upgraded, in my opinion, was the covers for all the lights. The Anovos ones fit nicely, but they were mostly the wrong color, and since they're basically just clip-in bits of plastic on pegs, I'm not sure how I would have gone about mounting the appropriate lights to them. You could probably make them work with some paint or drilling, but I thought it was more trouble than it was worth, so those went bye-bye. The replacement fittings I got from gbfans.com because I couldn't find them anywhere else, especially the hat lights. They really seem to have cornered the market on those. So once I had my set, I measured the holes with a caliper and re-drilled the body holes so they'd match the new fittings. The only one that gave me any trouble was the sunken hat light on the top. The wall inside the body just wouldn't let it sit right, so I used a file and sanded the lip off the one side, and then it fit perfectly when it was glued in from underneath. For fitting the LEDs into the sockets, I cut some craft foam and wrapped them, then gently shoved those up into the socket of the light cover. It holds them pretty well, and I wanted the lights to be removable just in case I had to replace anything later on. The trigger box and the instrument bar didn't quite fit on my copy, so I used a Dremel to just kind of kiss the mating edges down on the trigger box. And you can see here we have another build casualty on the instrument bar. I had to widen the hole for the red slow blow light, and that took kind of a bite out of the paint of the surrounding area. So I filled it back in with a little bit of Bondo spot putty and hit both of them with a fresh coat of black paint before the final assembly. Once the paint was dry, I fit the switches inside the trigger box and fished the wires through the instrument bar, then used a little bit of Gorilla Glue and everything friction fit nicely. For the tube under the instrument bar, I did the hot water trick again to slide the green hose over the clippered barb fittings and Gorilla Glued those into place. On the inside, I backed the clippered barbs with a wad of Loctite epoxy putty for extra durability. In dry fitting the electronics, I didn't think the bar graph looked that great. It was back set too far and the interior surface was very uneven, and it would have had to been ground away to get any kind of decent fitting for it. So using a Dremel, I cut the bezel completely out to match the size of the bar graph and used a square file to clean up the edges. And rather than repaint the whole thing, I touched up the exposed resin with a brush and a little bit of black paint. I was originally just going to make a bezel myself, but I saw online that a GBFans user by the handle Spongeface sells a nice, inexpensive bar graph bezel kit. So I bought one of those, and I have to say it really adds a nice extra dimension to the setup. There's a silver decal that adds some edge detail, and a lenticular lens cover that gives the whole thing kind of a 3D quality. It was classier than what I was going to do, so I thought it was well worth a couple extra bucks. The barrel and handle was kind of tricky. First, I had to widen the holes on the ear so the orange hat light and switch would fit in. I used a caliper to measure how big the socket was, so I only drilled a hole large enough for that to fit, but not all the way through, so there was still a lip for the switch to grab onto. Originally, my clear acrylic barrel wouldn't fit down into the handle. There was a lot of slop the way they cut the tube, so I cleaned that up with a reamer. All it took was a little bit, and the acrylic barrel fit right in. Now, here's where it gets a little dicey. Since I'm running wires from the outside of the ear down through the handle to the electronics inside the body, you have to figure how those wires are going to run from the outside to the inside. So after a lot of thought and looking at some reference photos of screen-used packs, I decided the best thing to do was to drill a hole in the base of the handle, then mark and do the same on the acrylic tube. Since acrylic is brittle, you want to build up slowly. Use a small drill bit and then gradually step your way up to a bit that matches how big you intend the final hole to be. I didn't trust myself to do this with a hand drill, so I used a drill press. It's a little nerve-wracking, so like everything else, just take your time and be patient and you'll do fine. To fit the LED inside the barrel, I cut a piece of black foam, wrapped the LED, and gently pushed that into place using a screwdriver. Now, once I glued the barrel in place, I fit the ear switch and light into their sockets. I fished the excess down the barrel and put a piece of shrink tube around them to protect them. Now the barrel assembly can be fit onto the body of the wand, and you can get all your wires plugged back in. I used some string to fish the ribbon cable that connects the wand to the pack electronics through the connecting tube. This way I could attach both the tube and ribbon to the wand at the same time. Then it was a matter of getting all the lights plugged into place and seating the electronics board. The vent light doesn't have a socket, it's just kind of held into place by all the other spaghetti wiring. Mine isn't quite in the middle, but I'm fine with it being, quote, out of place because it still looks appropriately bright. Once all the guts were in place, it was time to seal up the wand. On the base plate, I found more than half of the pre-drilled holes to be off the mark. It seems like nothing can be simple with this build. So after some thought, I very carefully marked where the hole should be with a silver Sharpie so the mark would show up against the black, and filled in the misdrilled holes with Loctite epoxy putty, then re-drilled the holes. Make sure to fully mix your putty and let it cure a full 24 hours, because otherwise it'll tear out when you try and re-drill the holes. But if done right, the epoxy will be rock solid and acts as a great filler. You might need to do a little bit of sanding to level off the excess, and you'll need to hit it with another coat of paint. Ideally, you would check this before you paint, but in the excitement of everything, I painted it first, and this was one of the last things I had to do. I also found the cover on the instrument bar didn't quite fit, and it was too late in the build to try and re-drill the holes, so I just nicked the little off the one side with a Dremel and then fit it into place. And for the final touch, I slid on my aluminum trigger ring. They included a nice replica, but like the PH25 resistor on the pack, I just thought it would look a lot better than if I tried to do a metallic paint job. And if I did, I thought it would stick out like a sore thumb being right next to the ring collar, which they did make out of aluminum. Now, in attaching the brass Legrees, the screws didn't quite work with my new trigger ring, so the ones I have here, I'm just using as placeholders until I can find the appropriate ones later on. All right, we're in the home stretch now, and we just have to figure out how to put all of this together. I started by attaching the vent into the pre-cut hole. Naturally, it didn't quite fit, so I carefully sanded it down to get it to a friction fit, then glued that in place. Then I glued these support struts over the back like the directions say, so for the first time since the beginning, I'm actually following the instructions. Next, I fixed the misaligned holes on the motherboard, and I did that the same way as the ones on the neutrino wand base plate, by marking where they should be with a silver Sharpie, filling them in with Loctite epoxy, letting that come to a full cure, re-drill the holes, and then married it all together with a fresh coat of paint. And it was during this step that I also aligned where the Alice frame was going to get bolted on. Now, a lot has been said on the forums about people wanting to replace this motherboard with an aluminum one, and if you have the means, more power to you. But if this is your only option, when you put on your standoffs, just put washers on both sides of the board, and that'll protect the acrylic from any stress cracking that might occur, and the acrylic motherboard will take the pack weight no problem. Now with the frame in place, it was time to plan where my extra features were going to live. Going into this, I knew I wanted to have an external power switch, so I used this round illuminated push-button one. I also wanted an external charging port, and while we're making extra holes, I just thought I'd throw in an external stereo jack. This way I can play anything I want off my phone through the sound system of the pack. Now, I know none of this is movie accurate, but it adds some nice extra functionality, and being it's all hidden between the board and my back, I figured it was a safe place to take some liberty. As far as the electronics go, I found the GB Fans board to be very well thought out, very feature-rich, and a pretty good bang for your buck, so that's the route I went with this. And I decided for my build the best thing to do was mount the electronics inside the pack shell itself. It was during this step that I finally attached the crank knob to the pack. I wanted the knob to be able to control the volume on the pack, but the included knob has a post on it. It's just kind of made to glue in place. So to make this functional, I cut the post off and drilled a hole in the center of the knob the size of this old potentiometer I had lying around, then drilled and tapped a hole for a set screw to secure the knob to the potentiometer. Unfortunately, the GB Fan sound pot was on the back side of the soundboard, and the standoffs I had weren't tall enough to counter that. So to get the board to lay flat, I desoldered their adjustment knob and soldered the leads of my potentiometer in their place. On the board they included terminals for an external sound pot, and I realized all of this could have been avoided by just having taller standoffs, but I didn't, so I made do with what I had. Once I had them and all my external switches in place, it just took a little bit of light soldering to attach some of the leads to go from those into the terminals on the boards. Electronics are a whole new ballgame for me, and at first it can seem intimidating, but soldering, it really isn't that complicated. For the battery, I mounted that to the motherboard by supergluing some double-sided Velcro, which will hold it in place and act as removable strap should I ever have to change it out or replace it. For the speaker, I felt kind of boxed in by the pre-cut vent that Anovos placed in the middle of the motherboard. I decided to cut some black cloth and glue that over the vent. I thought it looked a little nicer, and not only would it black out the speaker, but protect it from exposure of external contaminants. Now, being this motherboard is made out of acrylic, out of an overabundance of caution, I really didn't want to have to drill any more holes than I had to, so I tried to use these vent supports to mount the speaker, and for that I flattened some metal shelving brackets bulked those up with some Loctite epoxy for extra support, attached those to the speaker, and then superglued them onto the supports. Once that glue had cured, I encased the standoffs and the shelving brackets completely with hot glue to not only reinforce those, but to give the whole thing a little more adhesion to the motherboard. Hot glue deserves more credit than it gets. I mean, I wouldn't pull a truck with it, but it's essentially thermoform plastic. It's pretty tenacious stuff. Now, with the motherboard assembly completed, I just had to bring everything very carefully together. For the wand loom going into the pack, I put zip ties on both the inside and the outside so it would keep the loom from slipping in or out. Now I just very carefully attached my leads to the board terminals and sealed it all up. And that was it. Or so I thought. After a few days, my labels started peeling off. I tried smoothing them back on, but they just keep creeping off. It's too bad because the print quality of the stock labels is pretty nice, but the adhesion is just non-existent. Maybe they'll change something, but this is how my copies were. I mean, I was dusting the pack with an air duster and one of the labels literally just blew off. I decided rather than use super glue, I just upgrade the labels altogether. So I found some inkjet printable vinyl online, and not only are these water resistant, they have much better adhesion than the Anovos pack-in labels. For the stripe on the end filter, I had some leftover red from a previous Halloween build, but you can find some for $1 at Michael's. Cut a strip the width of a 1/4 inch, which I believe is the screen accurate size for a GB2 pack, and applied that using a little bit of Scotch tape as the transfer medium. And I hid the seam at the bottom since that's going to be the least visible part of the pack. I also bought a couple of aluminum labels, and I think these add a really nice dimension. I tried replicating this look with silver vinyl, and while it photographs nicely, in person it just doesn't look the same, so I thought the aluminum labels were well worth the extra money for the added character and screen accuracy. Well, there it is. Put the finishing touches on the only Halloween costume I'll need for the rest of my life. Overall, I'm extremely happy with how this pack came out. Now, people can debate screen accuracy all they want, and that's fine, but to me, there's always a point where the work becomes your own, and deviating from screen accuracy kind of turns into you taking ownership of the work. Yeah, maybe there's a paint run only you notice, or a decal that's a little off-center, but those touches are unique to your prop, and while we all start out trying to replicate screen accuracy, it's really just kind of an idealized starting point. There's certain things on here that aren't screen accurate, and there's a lot of little details I only know now because I've built a Proton Pack now. But that discovery is all part of the fun of building something like this yourself. And even though this was a kit, you can see it still took a heck of a lot of ingenuity and some reverse engineering to get the thing into its final shape. Again, I'd like to thank everyone on the GB Fans forums for being so helpful. While I was waiting for my Anovos kit to arrive, I dug through a lot of threads, and it was really inspiring seeing what people had come up with, and to be able to cherry pick little things here and there to take my pack to that next level. It was really impressive to see how many people set out to do the same thing, but we all do it just a little bit differently. It's a great resource and community, and I can't recommend it highly enough. So if you're building one of these kits, hopefully this video helps you brainstorm some creative solutions to any problems you might be facing. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on Twitter or leave a comment below, and don't forget to check out bombasticentertainment.com to see what we're up to. Thanks for watching. Learning to get this back on the V-hook is a bit of an art.